When a mafia boss's wife finally breaks her silence, she doesn't just leave. She declares war. Damian Wolfe built an empire on fear and control. For 3 years, his wife Nora endured his lies, his cruelty, and his betrayals. But on the night he expected her submission, she handed him divorce papers instead. What Damian didn't know was that Nora had been planning her escape for months, and she knew every one of his secrets. This is the story of a woman who refused to be destroyed by a monster. If you love stories about power, revenge, and survival, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The penthouse was silent when Damian Wolfe stepped through the door. It was the kind of silence that preceded storms, heavy, expectant, alive with something unseen. He paused in the marble foyer, his hand still on the handle, and listened. No television murmuring from the living room, no running water from the bathroom, no soft footsteps of his wife padding toward him with that carefully neutral expression she'd perfected over the past year. Just silence. Damian's jaw tightened as he closed the door behind him. The sound echoed through the vast space like a gunshot. He'd been gone for 2 days. 2 days handling the Marcus situation, which had required his personal attention and left 3 bodies in a warehouse on the industrial side of the city. He was exhausted, blood-spattered suit already bagged and disposed of, but his mind was still running hot with adrenaline and the particular satisfaction that came from eliminating a problem permanently. He'd expected Nora to be asleep, or pretending to be asleep, which was more likely. She'd gotten good at that, the art of seeming unconscious while he knew damn well she was lying there, rigid as a corpse, waiting for him to finish whatever he'd come home to do and leave her alone. But this silence was different. Damian moved through the foyer, his expensive shoes making no sound on the heated marble floors. The penthouse stretched before him in shadows and amber light from the city below. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the far wall, offering a view of the skyline that had cost him $8 million and several strategic murders. Everything in this space screamed wealth and power, from the Italian leather furniture to the original Rothko on the wall to the hand-carved mahogany bar that had been shipped piece by piece from a demolished English manor. He'd built this empire from nothing, from the gutters of South Brooklyn where he'd grown up with rats and roaches and a father whose greatest accomplishment was drinking himself to death before his 40th birthday. Damian had clawed his way up through blood and betrayal, through strategic alliances and brutal eliminations, until he stood at the top of the food chain, untouchable, unstoppable. And Nora, sweet, quiet, pregnant Nora, was just another piece of that empire. A beautiful piece, certainly. The kind of wife that looked perfect on his arm at charity galas and business dinners. The daughter of a respected family, educated, refined, exactly the type of woman a man in his position needed to complete the picture. She knew what he was. She'd known before they married, though perhaps not the full extent of it. And she'd accepted it because she'd had no real choice. Her family's debts had seen to that. Damian had offered a solution. Marriage, financial security, protection. All she had to do was play the part. For 3 years, she'd done exactly that. But lately, something had shifted. Damian couldn't quite put his finger on it. She was still obedient, still quiet, still performed her duties as his wife with that same careful neutrality. But there was something in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. A distance, a coldness that made him think of deep water and things that lived in the dark. He told himself it was the pregnancy. Women got emotional when they were carrying, hormonal, irrational. It would pass once the baby was born, and she had something to focus on besides whatever imaginary grievances she'd constructed in that pretty head of hers. The living room was empty. So was the kitchen, though he noticed a single wine glass in the sink, unusual given that she'd stopped drinking the moment she found out she was pregnant. He picked it up, sniffed it. Water. Just water. Something cold moved through his chest. "Nora?" His voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. The voice that made grown men flinch and fumble for explanations. The voice that had ordered executions and negotiated treaties and built an empire on the bones of anyone stupid enough to challenge him. No answer. Damian moved toward the bedroom, his instincts firing warnings he didn't fully understand. The door was open. The bed was made, perfectly made, hospital corners and all, not a wrinkle in the silk duvet. Nora's side of the closet stood open, and he could see gaps where her clothes had been. Not all of them, but enough. The cold in his chest spread like frost. He turned and strode back toward the living room, moving faster now, his mind cataloging details he'd missed the first time. The family photos that had been on the mantel were gone. The small jade plant she'd kept on the windowsill, gone. The bookmark she'd left in the novel on the side table, gone. And then he saw her. Nora sat in the armchair by the window, perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple black dress, not one of the designer pieces he'd bought her, but something plain and severe that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, revealing the delicate bone structure that had first caught his attention 4 years ago. She'd been 23 then, working as a gallery assistant, barely making rent on a studio apartment in Queens. Now she was 27 and 5 months pregnant with his child, and she was looking at him like she'd never seen him before. "Jesus Christ," Damian breathed, pressing a hand to his chest in mock alarm. "You scared the shit out of me. What are you doing sitting in the dark like some kind of—" He stopped. On the table beside her, illuminated by the city lights filtering through the window, sat a stack of papers. Legal-sized, official-looking, and resting on top of them, catching the light like a tiny beacon, was her wedding ring. Damian stared at the ring, then at the papers, then at his wife's face. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, just sat there with her hands folded over the small swell of her belly, watching him with those dark, fathomless eyes. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "Divorce papers," Nora said. Her voice was steady, calm, like she was commenting on the weather. "I've already signed them. You just need to add your signature, and we can begin the process of dividing assets and determining custody arrangements." For a long moment, Damian simply stood there, certain he'd misheard, certain this was some kind of joke or a pregnancy hormone-induced breakdown that would resolve itself once he talked her down from whatever ledge she'd climbed onto. Then he started to laugh. It began as a chuckle, low in his chest, and built into genuine laughter that echoed through the penthouse. He laughed until his sides hurt, until tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, until the absurdity of the situation fully crystallized in his mind. Nora Wolfe, his wife, his property, the woman who owed him everything, thought she could divorce him. "Oh, sweetheart," he said when he could breathe again, wiping at his eyes. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is really something. Did one of your book club friends put this idea in your head? Tell me it was Sandra. I always knew that woman was trouble. No one put anything in my head," Nora interrupted, her voice cut through his amusement like a scalpel. "I'm leaving you, Damian, tonight. I've already moved my essential belongings to a secure location. The rest can be handled through our attorneys." The laughter died in his throat. Damian crossed the room in 3 long strides, his shadow falling over her like a thundercloud. But Nora didn't flinch, didn't shrink back, just kept looking at him with that same unsettling calm. "You're not going anywhere," he said softly. "You're my wife. You're carrying my child. And you seem to have forgotten what happens to people who try to leave me." "I haven't forgotten anything," Nora replied. "I know exactly what you are. I know about the warehouse in Red Hook. I know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I know about the 3 city councilmen on your payroll and the federal judge you bought last year. I know about Marcus Delgado and what you did to him 2 nights ago." Damian went very still. "I know about Victoria Chen," Nora continued, her voice never wavering. "The woman you've been keeping in an apartment in Tribeca for the past 18 months. I know about the others before her. I know about the child you fathered with your attorney's wife 6 years ago, the one you pay her to keep quiet about. I know everything, Damian, every lie, every murder, every betrayal." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Damian smiled. It was the smile that usually preceded violence, the one that made his enemies start bargaining for their lives. "You think you can threaten me?" he asked, his voice dropping into a register that most people only heard once before they stopped hearing anything at all. "You think you can walk into my home, my penthouse, and blackmail me with information you have no way of proving?" "I'm not threatening you," Nora said. "I'm divorcing you. There's a difference." "There's no difference," Damian snarled. "You're mine, Nora. You were mine the moment I paid off your family's debts. You were mine when you walked down that aisle. You're mine now, and you'll be mine until I decide otherwise. Do you understand me?" "No." The word hung in the air between them. Damian's hand shot out and gripped the arm of her chair, his knuckles white. "What did you just say to me?" "I said no," Nora repeated. "I don't belong to you, Damian. I never did. And I'm done pretending otherwise." He wanted to hit her. The urge was so strong it made his muscles twitch. He'd never hit her before, had never needed to, because she'd always been so perfectly obedient, so carefully managed. But right now, looking at the defiance in her eyes, he wanted to teach her exactly what happened to people who defied Damian Wolfe. His hand was halfway to her face when a voice spoke from the shadows behind him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Damian spun around, his other hand instinctively reaching for the gun he kept in his shoulder holster. But he froze when he saw the man standing in the doorway to the study. James fucking Castellano. He was older than Damian by 15 years, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his mouth and eyes. But there was nothing soft about him. James Castellano was old-school Mafia, the kind who'd built his empire back when the families still controlled the city, before the Russians and the Albanians and the cartels had started carving up territory. He was semi-retired now, or so everyone said, content to live off his investments and the fear he'd cultivated over 4 decades of brutal efficiency. And he was standing in Damian's penthouse like he owned the place. "What the hell are you doing here?" Damian demanded. James smiled slightly. "Nora invited me." "Nora invited?" Damian whirled back to his wife, fury building in his chest like a bonfire. "You brought James Castellano into our home?" "I brought a witness," Nora corrected. "Someone who can verify that I made this offer in good faith and that you responded with threats of violence." "A witness," Damian repeated slowly. He looked between them, his wife sitting perfectly still in her chair, her hands folded over their child. James Castellano standing in the shadows like an undertaker at a funeral, and something clicked into place in his mind. "You think he can protect you?" Damian asked, his voice rising. "You think because you've got James fucking Castellano standing in my living room that somehow changes the equation? That I won't destroy you both?" "James isn't here to protect me," Nora said quietly. "He's here to make sure you understand something important." "And what's that?" Nora stood up slowly, one hand supporting her belly. She moved to the window and looked out at the city sprawling below them. Millions of lights, millions of lives, all of them unaware that in this penthouse, on this night, something was ending. "You've spent 3 years trying to break me," she said softly. "Controlling where I go, who I see, what I wear, monitoring my phone calls and emails, isolating me from my friends and family, making sure I understood that I was nothing without you. That I had no power, no choices, no future, except the one you designed for me." She turned to face him, and for the first time Damian saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. It was pity. "You spent so much time making sure I was afraid of you," Nora continued, "that you never stopped to consider what I might become if I stopped being afraid." "This is ridiculous," Damian snapped. He grabbed the divorce papers off the table and tore them in half, then in quarters, then let the pieces fall to the floor like confetti. "You're not divorcing me, Nora. You're not leaving, and you're sure as hell not taking my child anywhere. This little episode ends now. Mr. Castellano, I appreciate you taking an interest in my domestic affairs, but I think it's time for you to leave." James didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. "Not until Nora is safely relocated to her new residence." "Her new—" Damian laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. "You really think you can waltz in here and take my wife away from me? You think I'm just going to let that happen?" "I think," James said carefully, "that you're going to sit down and think very carefully about your next move. Because the moment you touch her, the moment you make any move against her, the information she's compiled about your operations goes directly to the FBI, the DEA, and the New York State Attorney General's office." Damian froze. "Bluff," he said flatly. "It's not a bluff," Nora said. She reached into her purse, a small black clutch Damian had never seen before, and pulled out a USB drive. "Everything's on here: financial records, recordings of your conversations with associates, photographs, witness statements. I've been documenting everything for 14 months, Damian, ever since I found out I was pregnant and realized I needed to get our child away from you." The world seemed to tilt sideways. 14 months. She'd been planning this for 14 months, while she'd smiled at him across the dinner table, while she'd attended his business functions and played the perfect wife, while she'd let him touch her, kiss her, while she'd conceived his child. She'd been building a case against him. "You're lying," Damian said, but his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. Nora walked toward him, her steps slow and deliberate. When she was close enough that he could smell her perfume, the jasmine scent he'd bought her for their first anniversary, she held out the USB drive. "I don't want to destroy you," she said quietly. "I just want to be free. Sign the divorce papers, agree to reasonable custody arrangements, and this drive goes into a safety deposit box where it stays unless something happens to me or our child. Refuse, and everything goes public tomorrow morning." Damian stared at the small plastic device in her hand. Such a tiny thing to contain so much destruction. "You won't do it," he said. "If you release that information, you implicate yourself. You've been living off my money, benefiting from my business. They'll come after you too." "I've thought of that," Nora said. "I've already spoken with an attorney who specializes in spousal immunity and witness protection. I've documented every instance where you threatened me, controlled me, isolated me. There's a legal term for it: coercive control. It's a form of domestic abuse, Damian, and it's going to be very easy to prove." The room spun. Damian reached out to steady himself against the back of the sofa, his mind racing through possibilities and outcomes, calculating odds the way he'd been trained to do since he was 16 years old and first started running numbers for the Moretti family. Every scenario ended the same way, with him in prison or dead. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea what you're starting." "I'm not starting anything," Nora replied. "I'm ending it. The only question is whether you're going to let it end quietly or if you're going to force this to become ugly." She set the USB drive on the table beside her wedding ring. The two objects sat there side by side, one a symbol of the life she was leaving behind, the other a weapon that could destroy everything he'd built. "I'm staying at a secure location tonight," Nora said. "My attorney will contact you tomorrow to begin the formal process. You have 48 hours to decide whether you're going to cooperate or if I'm going to the federal prosecutor." She picked up her purse and moved toward the door where James Castellano waited, but Damian's voice stopped her. "I'll find you," he said softly. "Wherever you're going, whatever hole you think you can hide in, I'll find you. And when I do, you're going to wish you'd never tried this." Nora paused in the doorway. For a moment, she looked back at him, and Damian saw something in her expression that chilled him to his core. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror 1,000 times. The look of someone who'd calculated all the angles, considered all the possibilities, and decided that victory was worth any price. "You taught me something important, Damian," she said quietly. "You taught me that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who has nothing left to lose. I don't have anything left to lose. You took it all. My family, my friends, my freedom, my dignity. The only thing I have left is our child, and I will burn your entire empire to the ground before I let you turn our baby into another one of your possessions." She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that was both protective and defiant. "Come after me if you want," Nora continued. "Threaten me, follow me, try to intimidate me back into submission. But understand this. The real danger in this room has never been you. It's always been what you made me become." Then she was gone, James Castellano's hand on her elbow as he guided her into the private elevator that served the penthouse. The doors closed with a soft chime, and Damian was alone with the ruins of his carefully constructed world. He stood there for a long time, staring at the elevator doors. Then he looked down at the torn divorce papers scattered across his marble floor, at the USB drive and wedding ring sitting on the table like evidence at a crime scene. A sound escaped his throat, something between a laugh and a snarl. Did she really think she could threaten him? Did she really believe that 14 months of gathering information and making plans was enough to bring down Damian Wolfe? He'd survived gang wars and federal investigations. He'd outlasted rivals who'd tried to take his territory and associates who'd tried to take his life. He'd built an empire through sheer will and ruthless efficiency, and no one, not the FBI, not rival families, and certainly not his own wife, was going to take it away from him. Damian pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Vincent," he said when the line picked up. "We have a problem. I need you to find someone for me. And when you find her, I want you to make sure she understands the consequences of betraying me." He listened to the response, his eyes never leaving the elevator doors. "I don't care where she is or who's protecting her," he said softly. "I want her brought back here tonight, alive and undamaged. I'm not a monster, but I want her to know that she's made the biggest mistake of her life." He ended the call and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had been his kingdom for 15 years. Somewhere out there, Nora was thinking she'd won, thinking she'd outsmarted him, thinking she could just walk away and start a new life with his child. She had no idea what was coming, because Damian Wolfe didn't lose. He didn't accept defeat, and he certainly didn't let his possessions decide when they were done belonging to him. The game was just beginning, and by the time it was over, Nora would understand that freedom was an illusion he'd allowed her to believe in, that the cage had never been the penthouse or the marriage or the careful control he'd exerted over every aspect of her life. The cage was him, and there was no escape from Damian Wolfe, not ever. What Damian didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he stood there planning his wife's recapture and punishment, was that Nora Ellison had been preparing for this moment longer than 14 months. She'd been preparing for it since the night of their wedding, when she'd watched him take a phone call in the middle of their first dance and understood exactly what kind of man she'd married. She'd been preparing for it through every threat, every manipulation, every carefully calculated moment of cruelty disguised as affection. And she'd been preparing for it since the day she found the file her mother had hidden, the file that explained why Catherine Ellison had died in a car accident that wasn't an accident at all, and why Nora's entire life had been a carefully constructed lie designed to protect a secret that powerful men would kill to possess. In the car speeding away from the penthouse, Nora allowed herself one moment of weakness. Her hand shook slightly as she pulled out her phone and sent a single text message to a number Damian didn't know existed. "It's done." He took the bait. The response came 30 seconds later. "Good. Phase 2 begins now. Get some rest. You're going to need it." Nora deleted both messages and powered down the phone. Then she looked out at the city lights streaming past and thought about the child growing inside her, a child who would never know the monster its father was, who would never be used as a pawn in Damian Wolfe's endless games of power and control. She thought about her mother, who had died protecting her from a truth she was only now beginning to understand. And she thought about the man who was coming, the man Damian didn't know about, the one who'd been watching and waiting for exactly this moment. Her biological father, the nightmare that made Damian Wolfe look like a fairy tale villain. Nora closed her eyes and felt the weight of what was coming settle over her like a shroud. She told Damian that she had nothing left to lose, and that was true. What she hadn't told him was that she had something far more dangerous than nothing. She had a purpose, and she would see it through to the end, no matter what it cost her. The car merged onto the highway, carrying her away from the penthouse and toward a future that terrified her more than anything Damian could do, because she knew something he didn't. The real danger wasn't behind her. It was ahead, and it was coming for them both. The safe house was nothing like Nora had imagined. She'd pictured something sterile and institutional, blank walls, uncomfortable furniture, the kind of place designed for function rather than comfort. Instead, James Castellano led her into a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights with crown molding and hardwood floors, original fireplaces and windows that looked out onto tree-lined streets where normal people lived normal lives. "It belonged to my daughter," James said, watching Nora take in the space. "Before she moved to California, I keep it maintained for situations like this." "Situations like this," Nora repeated softly. She set her bag down on the vintage sofa and wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly exhausted. "How many wives have you helped escape from men like Damian?" "Enough," James said. He moved to the kitchen and began making tea without asking if she wanted any. "You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult." But Nora couldn't rest. Her mind was racing, replaying the confrontation in the penthouse, analyzing every word, every gesture, looking for mistakes she might have made. Damian's face when he'd seen the divorce papers, that moment of genuine shock before the fury set in, played on repeat behind her eyes. "He's going to come after me," she said. "I know." James returned with 2 cups of chamomile tea and handed her one. "That's why we're moving you again tomorrow. This is just temporary until we can finalize the more permanent arrangement." Nora's hand trembled slightly as she took the cup. The baby shifted inside her, a flutter of movement that reminded her why she'd done this, why she'd risked everything. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping me. You didn't have to." James settled into the armchair across from her, his weathered face unreadable. "Your mother was a good woman," he said after a moment. "She deserved better than what happened to her." Nora's breath caught. "You knew my mother?" "Everyone in certain circles knew Catherine Ellison," James replied. "She was brilliant, worked as a financial analyst for some of the biggest firms in the city. She had a gift for seeing patterns, understanding how money moved through systems. It made her very valuable to people who needed that kind of expertise." "And very dangerous," Nora added. James nodded slowly. Catherine knew things about accounts and transfers and offshore holdings that powerful men wanted to keep hidden. When she tried to walk away from that world, when she tried to protect you from it, they killed her," Nora finished. "I found the file she left, the one hidden in the safety deposit box. It took me 3 years to find it, but I did." "What did it tell you?" Nora set down her tea and pulled out her phone. Despite having powered it down in the car, she'd turned it back on once they arrived at the safe house. A calculated risk, but one she needed to take. She opened a photo and handed the phone to James. He studied the image for a long moment, his expression growing darker. "Where did you get this?" "From my mother's safety deposit box, along with letters, account numbers, and a name I'd never heard before." Nora paused. "Richard Castellano." James went very still. "Your brother," Nora continued, "the one who supposedly died in a boating accident 28 years ago." "He's not dead," James said flatly. He handed back the phone, his hands steady despite the tension in his jaw. "Is that what Catherine's file told you? That Richard is alive?" "It told me more than that." Nora pulled up another image. A birth certificate this time. Her birth certificate. "It told me that Richard Castellano is my biological father." The silence that followed was absolute. James stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to her. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring out at the quiet street below. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Catherine never told me," he said. "All these years I never knew." "She was protecting me," Nora said. "From him. From what he was." The file explained everything. How she met him, how he convinced her to help him hide money from his own family, how he promised to leave the life for her, and then how he changed his mind. "Richard never changed his mind about anything," James said bitterly. "Once he decided what he wanted, he took it, no matter who got hurt in the process. My mother found out she was pregnant and tried to leave. He threatened her, told her he'd take the baby, raise it in his world. So she went to his enemies and made a deal." James turned to face her. "What kind of deal?" "Information for protection. She gave them everything she knew about Richard's operations in exchange for a new identity and enough money to disappear. But Richard found out before she could run. That's when he staged his own death. Made it look like he'd gone down with his boat off the coast of Maine. Everyone thought he was dead, including you." "But he wasn't," James said. "No, he was in South America building a new empire with the money my mother had helped him hide. And when she tried to expose him years later, when she tried to make sure I'd never be found—" "The car accident," James finished. Nora nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes for the first time in months. She was driving home from the lawyer's office. She'd just updated her will, left instructions for me to access the safety deposit box when I turned 25. The brakes failed on a mountain road. The investigators ruled it mechanical failure, but the file had photos. Someone had cut the brake line. "And you think Richard ordered it?" "I know he did. Because 6 months after she died, someone approached my uncle about my family's debts, offered to clear them all in exchange for an introduction to me. That someone was acting on behalf of Damian Wolfe." James closed his eyes. "Richard sent Damian to find you. Not just find me, marry me, control me. Keep me close until Richard was ready to reveal himself and claim what he thinks belongs to him." Nora stood up, pacing to the fireplace. "My mother protected something, James, something worth killing for, and whatever it is, both Damian and Richard want it." "Do you know what it is?" "No, but I think Damian is going to try to force it out of me." She turned to face him. "That's why I had to leave tonight. Not because I wanted to divorce him, though that's true enough, but because I needed to draw him out. Make him desperate enough to show his hand before Richard makes his move. James studied her for a long moment. You're using yourself as bait. I'm using myself as a catalyst, Nora corrected, to force a confrontation between two men who've been circling each other for years. Damian doesn't know about Richard. He thinks he's the apex predator in this situation. But Richard's been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And I'm going to make sure that when he does, I'm ready. Ready for what? To destroy them both. The words hung in the air between them, stark and uncompromising. James looked at her with something like respect mixed with concern. You sound like your mother, he said quietly. Catherine had that same steel in her spine, that same willingness to burn the world down to protect what mattered. Then you understand why I'm doing this. I understand why you think you need to do this, James replied. But you're 5 months pregnant and going up against two of the most dangerous men in the criminal underworld. You need to think about your child. I am thinking about my child, Nora said fiercely. Every decision I've made has been about protecting this baby from the monsters who want to use it as leverage. I won't let my son or daughter grow up the way I did, with secrets and lies and the constant threat of violence hanging overhead. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down and her blood ran cold. Unknown number. But the message was clear enough. You made a mistake tonight, Nora. Come home and we can fix this. Stay away, and I'll make you regret it for the rest of your very short life. James saw her expression and held out his hand. She passed him the phone and watched his jaw tighten as he read the message. He's already moving, James said, faster than I expected. What do we do? Before James could answer, headlights swept across the windows. A car had pulled up outside, a black sedan with tinted windows. Not Damian's usual vehicle, but the type of car his people drove. Upstairs, James said quietly. Now. Nora didn't argue. She grabbed her bag and moved quickly up the stairs, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard James make a phone call, his voice low and urgent. From the second-floor bedroom, Nora watched as two men emerged from the sedan. They weren't Damian's usual enforcers. She'd memorized the faces of everyone in his inner circle over the past 3 years. These were new players. One of them approached the front door while the other stayed by the car, scanning the street with the practiced vigilance of someone expecting trouble. The doorbell rang. Nora held her breath, every muscle in her body tense. Through the floor, she could hear James moving toward the door, his footsteps measured and calm. The door opened. Can I help you, gentlemen? James's voice carried up the stairs. We're looking for someone, an unfamiliar voice replied. Woman, late 20s, pregnant. She might have come this way. A lot of pregnant women in Brooklyn, James said mildly. You got a name? Nora Wolfe. Her husband's very concerned about her well-being. Seems she walked out on him tonight without any explanation. He just wants to make sure she's safe. I'm sure he does. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anyone matching that description. There was a pause, then, Mr. Castellano, we know you helped her leave the penthouse tonight. We have witnesses who saw you leave with her in your car. Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, we're not leaving without her. Nora's hands clenched into fists. She looked around the bedroom for anything she could use as a weapon, but there was nothing except decorative pillows and a reading lamp. The easy way would be for you to get back in your car and report to Damian Wolfe that you couldn't find her, James said. His voice had taken on an edge now, the pleasant veneer dropping away to reveal the steel underneath. The hard way would be for you to try to force your way into my home and discover why that would be a very bad idea. We have our orders, and I have mine, James interrupted. I'm going to count to 10. If you're still on my doorstep when I reach 10, I'm going to assume you're hostile threats that need to be eliminated. 1. Nora heard the sound of safeties being clicked off. Multiple weapons. 2. Mr. Castellano, we don't want trouble. 3. Movement outside. Nora risked a glance out the window and saw the second man reaching into the sedan, pulling out something long and dark. A rifle. 4. You're making a mistake, one of the men said. Mr. Wolfe isn't going to forget this. 5, 6, 7. The men backed away from the door, but they didn't leave. Instead, they retreated to their car and took up positions behind it, weapons drawn. James closed the door and locked it. A moment later, he was climbing the stairs, his phone to his ear. We're compromised, he said to whoever was on the other end. I need the team here now. Yes, both of them, full tactical. He ended the call and looked at Nora. We need to move you to the secondary location. There's a car coming. The front window exploded. Nora threw herself to the floor as glass rained down. Downstairs, she heard James cursing, the sound of furniture being overturned as he took cover. Stay down, he shouted. Another window shattered. Then another. They weren't shooting to kill, not yet. This was suppressing fire, meant to keep James pinned while they prepared for entry. Nora crawled to the bedroom closet and pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She had one card left to play, one person who might be able to help, even though calling him was the last thing she wanted to do. She pulled up the number she'd saved under a false name and hit dial. It rang 3 times. Then a voice answered, smooth, cultured, with an accent that suggested European education and old money. Hello, Nora. Just 2 words, but they made her skin crawl. Because he'd known it was her. He'd been waiting for her call. I need help, she said. I know. I'm watching. There was a pause, then, tell James to hold position. My people will be there in 90 seconds. Your people. This isn't how I wanted our reunion to go, Richard Castellano said. But Damian's forced my hand. I'm coming for you, daughter. Try not to die before I get there. The line went dead. Downstairs, the shooting had stopped. In the sudden silence, Nora heard voices arguing, then the sound of car doors slamming, engines starting. She crawled to the window and looked out. The black sedan was pulling away, tires squealing. But it wasn't fleeing. It was making way for the 3 SUVs that had just turned onto the street, moving in perfect formation like sharks circling prey. The SUVs stopped. Doors opened. Men emerged. Not the thugs Damian employed, but professionals in tactical gear, moving with military precision. James appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. What did you do? I called him, Nora whispered. I called Richard. James's face went white. You what? I didn't have a choice. Damian's people were going to kill us. So instead you invited the devil himself to tea? James moved to the window and cursed when he saw the tactical team taking up positions around the house. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Saved our lives. For now. But Richard doesn't do anything without expecting payment. James grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. Whatever he wants from you, whatever price he demands. I know, Nora said, but I'd rather negotiate with the devil I don't know than die at the hands of the one I do. A knock on the door downstairs. Polite. Measured. Nothing like the aggressive pounding from before. James and Nora descended the stairs together. Through the shattered windows, she could see the tactical team had formed a perimeter, their weapons trained outward, protecting the house rather than threatening it. James opened the door. The man standing on the threshold looked nothing like his brother. Where James was weathered and hard-edged, Richard Castellano was refined and elegant. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, and his silver hair was swept back from a face that could have belonged to a banking executive or a university professor. But his eyes were the same as James's, cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. Hello, brother, Richard said. It's been a long time. Not long enough, James replied. Richard smiled slightly, then his gaze shifted to Nora. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his expression unreadable. You have your mother's eyes, he said finally. Catherine always could see right through people's lies. I imagine you can too. I know what you are, Nora said. I know what you want. Do you? Richard stepped into the house without being invited, his movements unhurried and confident. Then you know I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to protect my investment. I'm not an investment. I'm a person. You're my daughter, Richard corrected, which makes you family. And family, Nora, is the most valuable commodity in the world. You killed my mother. No, Richard said flatly. I loved your mother. What happened to Catherine was a tragedy, but it wasn't my doing. Someone else wanted her silenced. Someone who knew what she was protecting. Damian, Nora said. Damian is a tool, Richard replied dismissively. A useful one, certainly. I've been grooming him for years, feeding him resources and connections, helping him build his little empire. Also, he'd be in the right position when the time came to bring you into play. You sent him to marry me. I suggested the opportunity. Damian thought it was his idea. Men like him always do. They're so easily manipulated by their own ambition. Richard moved to the broken window and looked out at his tactical team. He served his purpose. He kept you safe, kept you isolated, made sure no one else could get close to you while I built my position. Safe? Nora felt rage building in her chest. He terrorized me. He controlled every aspect of my life. He cheated on me, threatened me, made me feel like I was going insane. And yet here you are, Richard said, turning to face her, stronger than ever, prepared to go to war against him. You think that happened by accident? You think your rebellion was organic? He smiled. I've been feeding you information for months, Nora. Little breadcrumbs of truth about Damian's activities, just enough to make you angry, just enough to make you start planning your escape. The world tilted. The woman who warned me about Damian's plan, Nora whispered. The one who showed up at my door 3 weeks ago, terrified. She worked for you. Victoria Chen is indeed on my payroll, as are several other people in Damian's organization. How else do you think you managed to gather so much evidence without him noticing? Nora felt sick. Everything I did was your own choice, Richard interrupted. I simply created the conditions for you to make those choices. The divorce, the confrontation, the evidence you've compiled, all of it is real. Your desire to escape Damian is real. I just helped you see what was already there. Why? James demanded. What's the endgame, Richard? What do you really want? Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Nora. Your mother protected something for me, he said. Something I need back. She hid it so thoroughly that even I couldn't find it. But she left clues, instructions, and I believe she gave you the key to finding it. Nora unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was a photocopy of a letter, her mother's handwriting, the ink faded but still legible. My dearest Nora, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've found the safety deposit box. I'm sorry for the secrets, sorry for the lies, sorry for everything I couldn't protect you from. But there's one more truth you need to know. The account number at the bottom of this letter leads to a trust fund I created in your name. Inside it is everything you need to understand who your father really is and what he's capable of. Use it wisely. Use it to stay safe. And whatever you do, don't let him find it before you're ready. I love you. Always. Mom. Below the message was a series of numbers and letters, an account number and routing code. I've tried every bank in the world, Richard said, every offshore institution, every private firm. The account doesn't exist, at least not under any name I can trace. But Catherine was brilliant. She hid it somewhere, and I believe the key to finding it is something only you would know, something personal, something she would have told you. And if I find it, Nora asked, if I give you what you want, then you and your child go free. I'll call off Damian, eliminate him if necessary. You'll have enough money to disappear, to start over anywhere in the world. All I want is what belongs to me. What's in the account? Richard smiled. Everything. Financial records that could bring down half the criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. Proof of connections between politicians and crime families. Account numbers for hidden fortunes that people thought were lost decades ago. Your mother spent 10 years compiling it, using her position and her skills to document the entire shadow economy. It's a weapon of mass destruction, Nora, and I intend to use it. To do what? To take control, Richard said simply. To consolidate power, eliminate rivals, build an empire that will last for generations. With that information, I'll be untouchable, unstoppable. Nora looked at the letter in her hands, then at Richard's expectant face, then at James standing tense and ready by the door. She thought about her mother, who'd spent her last years in fear, looking over her shoulder, trying to protect a daughter from the monster she'd once loved. She thought about Damian, who'd married her on Richard's orders, who'd spent 3 years controlling her, breaking her down piece by piece. And she thought about the baby growing inside her, innocent and unaware of the war being waged over its future. No, she said quietly. Richard's smile faded. I'm sorry? I said no. I'm not giving you the account. I'm not helping you build your empire. And I'm not letting you use me or my child as pawns in whatever game you're playing. Nora, Richard said carefully, you're not thinking clearly. The pregnancy hormones, the stress of leaving Damian, it's affecting your judgment. You need to... I need to get as far away from you as possible, Nora interrupted. She looked at James. Both of you, all of you, everyone who thinks they have a claim on my life. She moved toward the door, but Richard's voice stopped her. If you walk out that door, I can't protect you from Damian. He's already issued orders to find you. By morning, every criminal organization in the city will be looking for you. You'll be hunted. Then I'll run. You're 5 months pregnant. How far do you think you'll get? Nora turned to face him. Farther than you think, because unlike you, unlike Damian, I'm not weighed down by ego or pride or the need to control everything. I'm just a woman trying to protect her child. And that makes me a lot more dangerous than either of you could possibly understand. She walked out into the night, leaving Richard and James staring after her. The tactical team didn't move as she passed. They simply watched, weapons lowered, waiting for Richard's orders. Nora made it 3 blocks before her legs gave out. She sat down on a bench in a small park, her whole body shaking, and pulled out her phone. She had no allies left, no safe houses, no protection. Just the clothes on her back, the evidence against Damian stored in the cloud, and a mother's letter that promised answers she wasn't sure she wanted to find. But she had one more card to play. With trembling fingers, she dialed a number she'd found in her mother's file. A lawyer in Seattle who specialized in witness protection in federal cases. Someone Catherine had trusted with her final contingencies. The line rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice answered. Eleanor Morrison, Miss Morrison. My name is Nora Ellison. My mother was Catherine Ellison. She told me that if I ever needed help, if I ever needed to disappear, I should call you. There was a long pause, then, Where are you right now? Brooklyn, but I can't stay here. Are you in immediate danger? Yes. Can you get to Penn Station? I think so. There's a train leaving for Philadelphia in 45 minutes. Get on it. When you arrive, go to the Greyhound terminal and wait. Someone will find you. And Nora? Yes? Don't trust anyone who claims to want to help you. Your mother made a lot of enemies. Most of them are still looking for what she hid. The line went dead. Nora stood up, ignored the protest from her exhausted body, and started walking. Behind her, she could hear car engines starting. Richard's people, no doubt. And somewhere else in the city, Damian's hunters were searching. But for the first time in 3 years, Nora Ellison was making her own choices. And she was done being anyone's possession. Nora made it to Penn Station with 12 minutes to spare. She bought her ticket with cash from the emergency fund she'd been building for months, small withdrawals, never enough to trigger attention, hidden in the lining of her purse. The ticket agent barely looked at her, too busy texting to notice the pregnant woman whose hands were shaking so badly she could barely count out the bills. The train to Philadelphia sat waiting on track 7, its fluorescent interior a stark contrast to the dimly lit station. Nora climbed aboard and found a seat near the back, positioning herself where she could watch both exits. Old habits from 3 years of living with Damian. Always know your exits, always have an escape route, always assume someone is watching. She was right to be paranoid. As the train began to pull away from the station, Nora caught a glimpse of movement on the platform. 2 men in dark suits, scanning the departing cars with the focused intensity of hunters who'd just lost their prey. One of them pulled out a phone, and Nora slumped down in her seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. The train picked up speed, carrying her away from the city and toward an uncertain future. Around her, ordinary people dozed or scrolled through their phones or read paperbacks, completely unaware that they were sharing a car with a fugitive. A woman fleeing from a criminal empire. A daughter running from a father she'd never met. Nora pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the baby shift and turn. 5 months along, and already this child had survived more chaos than most people experienced in a lifetime. I'm going to keep you safe, she whispered, whatever it takes. Her phone buzzed. Despite every instinct screaming at her to ignore it, Nora looked at the screen. Damian. The message was brief and devastating. I know you're on the train to Philadelphia. I know about Eleanor Morrison. I know about the account your mother left you. Come back now and we can negotiate. Keep running and I'll make sure you lose everything, including our child. Nora's blood turned to ice. How did he know? She'd been so careful, had used cash for the ticket, hadn't told anyone except Eleanor Morrison, the lawyer her mother had trusted, the one person who was supposed to help her disappear. Either Eleanor had betrayed her, or Damian had access to information that shouldn't be accessible. Phone taps, maybe. Or someone monitoring Eleanor's communications. Either way, Nora was compromised before she'd even left the city. She powered down her phone and removed the SIM card, dropping it between the seats where it would be lost among the debris of 1,000 travelers. The phone itself went into her purse, useless now, but potentially valuable later if she needed to create a false trail. Think, she told herself. Damian knows about Philadelphia. He knows about Eleanor. What else does he know? The answer came to her with sickening clarity. Everything. If he'd been monitoring Eleanor Morrison, he'd have access to all of Catherine's contingency plans. Every safe house, every contact, every escape route her mother had carefully constructed would be known to him, which meant Nora couldn't go to Philadelphia, couldn't meet Eleanor's contact, couldn't follow any of the plans Catherine had left behind. She was completely alone. The train rattled through the New Jersey darkness, and Nora closed her eyes, forcing herself to think past the panic. She'd prepared for this. Not consciously, perhaps, but in all those months of planning her escape, she'd built redundancies, backup plans for the backup plans. One of them involved the file she'd uploaded to a secure server, the evidence against Damian that she'd threatened to release. But it also contained something else, something she'd discovered in her mother's papers but hadn't fully understood until now. Catherine Ellison had been brilliant at hiding things in plain sight. The account number she'd left in that letter wasn't just a random string of digits. It was a code, a puzzle that only someone who'd known Catherine intimately could solve. And Nora had just realized where the key was hidden. The train began to slow as it approached the first stop, Trenton. Nora gathered her bag and moved toward the exit, ignoring the curious glances from other passengers. When the doors opened, she stepped out into the cold November air and immediately looked for a taxi. "Where to?" the driver asked when she climbed in. Nora gave him an address she'd memorized years ago, a place she'd visited exactly once on the day of her mother's funeral, a place Catherine had made her promise to remember. The Greenwood Cemetery, main entrance. The driver gave her an odd look. It was nearly 11 at night, and cemeteries weren't exactly popular destinations at this hour. But he put the car in gear and pulled away from the station without comment. 20 minutes later, Nora stood at the iron gates of Greenwood Cemetery, watching the taxi's taillights disappear into the darkness. The cemetery was closed, of course, but Catherine had taught her daughter many things, including how to pick a simple lock. The gate swung open with a rusty creak that made Nora wince. She slipped inside and made her way along the winding paths, using the moonlight to navigate toward the section where Catherine was buried. The headstone was simple granite, marked with her mother's name and dates. Fresh flowers sat in the built-in vase. Nora had paid a service to maintain them weekly, one of the few personal expenses she'd managed to keep hidden from Damian. She knelt beside the grave, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward, and pressed her hand against the cold stone. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't understand sooner. I'm sorry I married him. I'm sorry for everything." The wind rustled through the trees overhead, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and rain. Nora closed her eyes and remembered the last conversation she'd had with her mother, 3 months before the accident. That wasn't an accident. They'd been sitting in Catherine's apartment, drinking tea, and her mother had seemed distracted, worried about something she wouldn't name. "If anything ever happens to me," Catherine had said suddenly, "I want you to remember something. The most valuable things aren't kept in vaults or banks. They're kept close to the heart." At the time, Nora had thought it was just one of her mother's philosophical musings. But now, kneeling beside Catherine's grave, she understood, close to the heart. Nora's fingers found the small locket she wore around her neck, a gift from her mother on her 16th birthday. She'd worn it every day since, even after Catherine died, even when Damian had tried to replace it with expensive jewelry he'd chosen himself. She opened the locket with trembling fingers. Inside were 2 photos. Catherine on one side, Nora as a child on the other. But there was something else, something she'd never noticed before. The backing behind her mother's photo looked slightly raised, as if something had been inserted beneath it. Nora carefully pried up the backing and found a thin strip of paper, folded so small it was almost invisible. She unfolded it with shaking hands and held it up to the moonlight. Numbers and letters, not an account number, at least not a complete one. But when combined with the sequence from her mother's letter, they formed something that made Nora's breath catch. Coordinates. Her mother hadn't hidden the account information in a bank. She'd hidden it somewhere physical, somewhere that required these exact coordinates to find. Nora pulled out the ruined phone and used its last bit of battery to check the location. Her heart sank when she saw where the coordinates led. Montana. The middle of nowhere, Montana, to be precise. A remote location in the mountains, hours from the nearest town. She had no money for a plane ticket, no credit card she could use without alerting Damian, no way to get across the country without leaving a trail he could follow. Unless she was willing to take a risk that terrified her almost as much as staying put. Nora stood up and made her way back to the cemetery gates, her mind racing. She had one asset left, one connection she hadn't used because the price seemed too high. But desperate times called for desperate measures. She found a payphone 3 blocks from the cemetery, a relic from another era, still maintained for emergencies. She dropped in quarters and dialed a number from memory, one she'd found in her mother's papers and filed away for exactly this kind of situation. The line rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice answered, sharp and suspicious. "Who is this?" "My name is Nora Ellison. I need to speak with Marcus Reeves." There was a long pause. Then, "Marcus Reeves is dead." "You have the wrong number." "No, I don't. Catherine Ellison saved his life 14 years ago when the Moretti family tried to have him killed. She hid him, got him new papers, helped him disappear. In return, he promised her a favor. No questions asked, no conditions attached. I'm calling in that favor." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Hold." Nora waited, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. In the distance, she heard sirens. Police or ambulance, she couldn't tell. Either way, it reminded her how exposed she was. Finally, a male voice came on the line. "Catherine's daughter?" "Yes. I heard about what happened to your mother. I'm sorry. She was a good woman." "She was, and she trusted you." "What do you need?" "Transportation to Montana. No paper trail, no electronic footprint. And I need it tonight." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's a tall order, especially with Damian Wolfe tearing the city apart looking for you. You know he's put a price on your head? $500,000 for information leading to your recovery. Alive and undamaged. I know. That's why I need to get out of the tri-state area before morning. Montana's a long way. What's there that's worth risking your life for? My future, my child's future, everything." Marcus sighed. "Your mother saved my life. More than that, she gave me a second chance when no one else would. I told her I'd repay that debt whenever she asked. I'm a man of my word." "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Getting you to Montana means I'm making an enemy of Damian Wolfe. That's not something I do lightly." "I understand. There's a truck stop off I-95, about 40 miles north of Trenton. Eddie's place. Be there in 2 hours. Someone will pick you up. From there, we'll get you west using routes that don't show up on any official maps. It'll take 3, maybe 4 days. You'll be traveling with people who don't ask questions and don't appreciate conversation. Keep your head down and do what you're told." "I can do that." "One more thing," Marcus said. "Once you leave with my people, you're on your own. I can get you to Montana, but after that, I'm out. Whatever you're planning, whatever your mother hid out there, it's your problem, not mine. We clear?" "Crystal clear." "Good. 2 hours. Don't be late." The line went dead. Nora hung up the phone and started walking. She had 2 hours to cover 40 miles with no car and no money left for a taxi. But she'd learned a lot in 3 years of marriage to a man who controlled every aspect of her existence. She'd learned how to be invisible, how to blend into crowds and slip past security, how to lie convincingly and manipulate situations to her advantage. She'd learned survival. An hour and 40 minutes later, she climbed out of a produce truck whose driver had picked her up on the highway. He'd asked no questions when she'd offered him $200 cash, the last of her emergency fund, and promised no questions in return. He'd simply pointed toward the truck stop in the distance and driven away. Eddie's place was exactly what Nora had expected, a rundown collection of buildings clustered around a parking lot full of 18-wheelers. Diesel fumes and the smell of fried food hung in the air. A neon sign flickered weakly, advertising hot coffee and showers. Nora went inside and ordered coffee she didn't drink, sitting in a booth near the back where she could watch the door. The waitress looked at her pregnant belly and offered a sympathetic smile. "You okay, honey? You look like you've had a rough night." "I'm fine," Nora said. Just waiting for someone. Well, you let me know if you need anything. And maybe eat something? You're eating for two now. Nora ordered toast she couldn't afford and wouldn't eat just to avoid more questions. The waitress brought it with another smile and a knowing look that said she'd seen plenty of desperate people pass through this truck stop and knew better than to pry. 20 minutes later, a man slid into the booth across from her. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. Nora? She nodded. I'm Danny. Marcus sent me. You ready to go? Yes. Good. Leave the coffee. Leave the toast. Don't look back when we walk out. There's a gray van in the northwest corner of the lot. Get in the back and stay quiet. We've got a long drive ahead of us. Nora followed his instructions exactly. The van's interior was sparse. No seats in the back, just blankets and boxes of what looked like auto parts. She climbed in and settled herself as comfortably as possible against the side wall. Two other people were already inside. A woman about Nora's age with hard eyes and a scar across her cheek, and an older man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Neither acknowledged her presence. Danny got in the driver's seat and started the engine. Within minutes, they were back on the highway, heading west into the darkness. The next 3 days passed in a blur of truck stops and back roads, cheap motels and rest area bathrooms. They drove in shifts, stopping only when necessary, always alert for signs of pursuit. Danny and his companions spoke little, and Nora learned not to ask questions. She spent the time thinking about what she'd find in Montana. The coordinates led to somewhere in the Bitterroot Mountains, far from any town. What could her mother have hidden there? Financial records, certainly. But Catherine had been protecting something more than just information, something worth dying for. On the third night, as they crossed into Montana, the woman with the scar finally spoke to her. You're Damian Wolfe's wife. It wasn't a question. Ex-wife, Nora said. Or soon to be. He's got people looking for you, everywhere. We almost got spotted twice in Nebraska because someone matching your description was seen at a gas station. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring trouble to you. The woman shrugged. Trouble's our business. Just wanted you to know, whatever you're running toward better be worth it. Because Damian Wolfe doesn't let go of his possessions, and that's what you are to him, property. Not anymore, Nora said quietly. The woman studied her for a long moment. Maybe. We'll see if you're still breathing in a week. They reached the coordinates on the fourth morning, just as the sun was rising over the mountains. Danny pulled the van off the main road onto a dirt track that wound up into the foothills, climbing higher and higher until Nora's ears popped from the altitude. Finally, he stopped in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. In the center of the clearing stood a small cabin, weathered by years of mountain winters but still structurally sound. This is it, Danny said. This is as far as we go. Nora climbed out of the van, her legs stiff from days of travel. The mountain air was cold and clean, so different from the city that it almost hurt to breathe. There's supplies inside, Danny continued. Food, water, firewood. Enough for a couple weeks if you're careful. After that, you're on your own. Thank you, Nora said. All of you. I know you risked a lot to help me. Danny nodded. Your mother was a good woman. She deserved better than what happened to her. I hope you find what you're looking for. He got back in the van and they drove away, leaving Nora alone in the clearing with nothing but the clothes on her back and the secrets her mother had died protecting. The cabin door was unlocked. Inside, everything was exactly as Danny had described. Basic supplies, a wood stove, a sleeping bag laid out on a simple cot. But there was something else, too. A locked metal box sitting on the small table with a note taped to the top. Nora recognized her mother's handwriting instantly. My darling Nora, if you've made it this far, then you're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I'm sorry for the secrets. I'm sorry for the danger I've left you in. But what's in this box is worth every sacrifice. It's the key to everything, your future, your freedom, and the truth about who you really are. The combination is the date we scattered your grandmother's ashes. I love you. Always. Mom. Nora's hand shook as she entered the combination. The date was seared into her memory. A cold October day when she was 12, standing on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching her mother pour ashes into the wind. The lock clicked open. Inside the box were 3 things: a thick folder stuffed with documents, a small leather journal, and a USB drive. Nora opened the folder first. Inside were financial records dating back 30 years, account numbers, transaction histories, lists of names and organizations. Her mother had documented everything: money laundering operations, offshore accounts, criminal enterprises spanning multiple continents. It was exactly what Richard had said it was: a weapon capable of destroying entire empires. But it was the journal that made Nora's blood run cold. Catherine's journal. Her private thoughts and observations, written in a careful hand that spoke of fear and determination in equal measure. Nora opened it to the first page and began to read. I never wanted this life. I was 23 when I met Richard Castellano, young and naive enough to believe that love could redeem anyone. He was charming, brilliant, dangerous in ways that excited me instead of frightening me like they should have. When he told me about his work, about the money he moved through shadow systems, I thought I could help him, thought I could use my skills to make his business legitimate. I was a fool. By the time I realized what he really was, not a businessman but a monster, it was too late. I was pregnant with his child, and he'd made it clear that the baby belonged to him. He had plans for us, for our daughter, plans that terrified me. So I made my own plans. I documented everything, every transaction, every connection, every dirty secret. And when the opportunity came to fake his death, to make it look like he'd gone down with his boat, I took it. I fed information to his enemies, helped them build a case that would force Richard to choose between his life and his empire. He chose to disappear, chose to let the world think he was dead while he rebuilt somewhere else. And I thought I was free. But freedom is an illusion when you know too much. Richard's associates started dying, people who knew about the money, about the systems I'd helped create. I realized that even though Richard was gone, someone was cleaning up loose ends, someone who knew what I'd done. So I built my final insurance policy. This box, these records, proof of everything, stored where no one could find it except my daughter. Because if something happens to me, Nora needs to know the truth. She needs to know that her father is still alive, that he's still dangerous, and that the only way to stop him is to burn his entire empire to the ground. The journal went on for hundreds of pages, documenting Catherine's double life. Her work as a legitimate financial analyst by day, and her secret role as Richard's accountant and money launderer by night. Her growing horror as she understood the scope of his operations. Her careful planning to escape with her daughter. And then, in the final pages, something that made Nora's world implode. I've discovered something terrible. The man calling himself Damian Wolfe isn't who he claims to be. His real name is Dominic Castellano, Richard's nephew, raised in the organization, trained from childhood to take over the business. Richard orchestrated everything: Dominic's new identity, his rise through the criminal ranks, his position of power in New York. All of it was designed to create the perfect trap. When Nora turned 25, when I knew she'd access the safety deposit box and learn about Richard, Dominic was supposed to be there waiting. He was supposed to marry her, control her, use her to force me out of hiding. The pregnancy was part of the plan. A grandchild to ensure Richard's bloodline, leverage to make sure Nora couldn't escape. I have to warn her. I have to make sure she knows before it's too late. Tomorrow I'm going to the lawyer, going to update my will, going to leave new instructions. And then I'm going to call Nora and tell her everything. But if you're reading this, then I never made that call. If you're reading this, Nora, then they killed me before I could warn you. And that means you're already in his trap. Already married to Dominic, already carrying his child. I'm so sorry, my darling. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. But you can still escape. The USB drive contains everything: the real account numbers, the complete records, video confessions from people Richard thought he could trust. Take it to the FBI. Take it to the Attorney General. Burn Richard's empire to the ground, and take Dominic down with it. You're stronger than you know. You're my daughter, and that means you're a survivor. Don't let them win. Don't let them make you a victim. Fight. Nora sat in the cold cabin, holding her mother's journal, and finally understood the full scope of the nightmare she'd been living. Damian wasn't just a criminal who'd married her for convenience. He was family. Richard's nephew, raised in the organization, programmed from childhood to serve his uncle's ambitions. Their entire relationship had been a lie. Every moment, every conversation, every touch, all of it orchestrated by Richard Castellano to serve his endgame. And the baby growing inside her wasn't just an innocent child caught in the crossfire. It was the culmination of a plan decades in the making, a grandchild to ensure the bloodline, an heir to Richard's empire. Nora felt rage building inside her. Not the hot, explosive kind, but something cold and deliberate, the kind of rage that could sustain her through what came next. She inserted the USB drive into the ancient laptop Catherine had left in the cabin and waited for it to load. What she found there was worse than anything she'd imagined. Video confessions from dozens of people, politicians, judges, law enforcement officials, all of them detailing their connections to Richard Castellano's organization. Financial records showing money flowing through legitimate businesses and charitable foundations, proof of murders, extortion, human trafficking, and more. It was everything her mother had promised, a weapon of mass destruction, and Nora was going to use it, but first she had to survive long enough to deploy it. Because if Richard had orchestrated her marriage to Damian, if he'd planned this for years, then he already knew about this cabin, about the coordinates hidden in the locket, about everything. He was probably on his way here right now. Nora stood up and went to the window, looking out at the pristine mountain landscape. Somewhere out there, powerful men were hunting her husband, or whatever Damian really was, her biological father, a monster who'd killed her mother and tried to steal her life. They thought she was trapped, thought she was weak and frightened and alone. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Nora gathered the documents, the journal, and the USB drive and prepared to make her final stand. This time, she wasn't running. This time, she was going to war. Nora had exactly 4 hours to prepare before they came. She knew this because the cabin had a security system her mother had installed. Motion sensors hidden in the trees, cameras disguised as birdhouses, pressure plates buried under the dirt road leading up to the clearing. All of it feeding to the old laptop, showing her everything within a 2-mile radius. And on that screen, she'd just watched 3 black SUVs turn onto the mountain road. They were moving slowly, cautiously, exactly the way professionals approached a target they expected to be defended. Which meant they knew about the security system, which meant someone had told them. The only person who could have known was Eleanor Morrison, the lawyer Catherine had trusted with her contingency plans, the woman Nora had called from Penn Station. Another betrayal in a long line of betrayals. Nora moved quickly through the cabin, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. She'd spent the past 4 hours since reading her mother's journal doing exactly what Catherine had taught her to do. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. The USB drive with all the evidence was no longer in the cabin. She'd uploaded everything to 3 separate secure servers, each requiring a different authentication method to access. If anything happened to her, if she missed even one of the scheduled check-ins she'd programmed, the files would automatically be released to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country. The original documents were sealed in waterproof bags and hidden in 3 different locations within a mile of the cabin. Insurance policies in case someone tried to claim the digital evidence was fabricated. And the journal, Catherine's final testimony, was already in the hands of someone Nora had never met, but whom her mother had trusted absolutely. A federal prosecutor named Sarah Chen, who'd been investigating Richard Castellano for 15 years and had nothing to show for it except dead witnesses and cold trails. Sarah had received the journal via overnight courier 2 hours ago, along with a letter from Nora explaining everything. By now, she'd be reading Catherine's words and understanding exactly what she had. The beginnings of a case that could bring down one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country. But all of that meant nothing if Nora didn't survive the next few hours. She moved to the window and watched the SUVs crawl closer. They were still a mile out, moving carefully, probably scanning for traps or ambush positions. They'd reach the clearing in 20 minutes, maybe 30. Nora had a choice to make. She could run. There was a back trail leading deeper into the mountains, a path Catherine had shown her once during a camping trip years ago. Nora could disappear into the wilderness, try to outlast them, hope that the pregnancy wouldn't slow her down too much. Or she could stay, face them, force the confrontation that had been building since the night she'd walked out of the penthouse. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her gasp. 5 months pregnant and running through mountain wilderness wasn't just dangerous, it was suicidal. The cold alone could kill her, and if she fell, if she went into premature labor out there with no help, the choice wasn't really a choice at all. Nora was staying. She went to the cabinet where Catherine had stored emergency supplies and found what she was looking for. A satellite phone, fully charged and programmed with a single number. Nora powered it on and pressed dial. The line connected immediately. "This is Special Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. It's Nora Ellison. You received my package?" "I did. I'm reading it now." "Mrs. Ellison, where are you?" "Montana. The coordinates were in the package. They're coming for me. Richard's people, Damian's people, maybe both. I need you to send help." "We're already moving," Sarah said, and Nora could hear the controlled urgency in her voice. "I've got agents en route from the Missoula field office, but they're 2 hours out. Can you hold that long?" "I don't know. They're close. Maybe 20 minutes. Then you need to run. Get out of there now. We can protect you once you're in custody, but if they get to you first—" "I'm not running," Nora interrupted. "I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting powerful men dictate my life." "Mrs. Ellison, I understand what you're feeling, but this isn't the time for bravery. These are dangerous people. They will kill you." "Maybe. But not before I get what I came for." "And what's that?" "The truth. On record. Witnessed. I want Damian to admit what he is. I want Richard to show his face. And I want all of it documented so thoroughly that no lawyer in the world can make it disappear." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're going to try to get them to confess. I'm going to make them confess. Because they think I'm cornered, think I'm desperate, think I'll trade the evidence for my life and my baby's safety. They're going to come in here expecting negotiation. And instead they're going to find out that my mother's daughter is nobody's victim." Nora could hear voices in the background on Sarah's end, other agents probably coordinating the response. When Sarah spoke again, her tone had shifted from concerned to calculating. "The cabin has the security system, cameras, audio. If you can keep them talking, if you can get them to incriminate themselves on camera, that's admissible evidence, better than documents or hearsay. That's what I'm counting on. Mrs. Ellison, Nora, you need to understand something. The moment you confront these men, you're putting yourself and your unborn child at tremendous risk. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this?" Nora looked around the cabin her mother had prepared, this final safe house built with love and desperation and the desperate hope that her daughter would be smart enough to use it. "I'm certain," she said. "Then keep this line open. Put the phone somewhere they won't see it, but where I can hear everything. And Nora, try to stay alive." "I'll do my best." Nora positioned the satellite phone behind a stack of firewood near the stove, where it would pick up audio but remain hidden. Then she checked the laptop one more time. The SUVs had stopped half a mile from the cabin. Doors were opening. People were getting out. She counted 9 figures, all of them moving with tactical precision. They were doing a perimeter sweep, making sure there were no surprises waiting. Smart, professional, exactly what she'd expected. What they didn't expect was that she'd be watching them, that every move they made was being recorded and transmitted to FBI servers in real time, that the trap they thought they were springing was actually a trap of her making. Nora sat down in the single chair at the cabin's small table and folded her hands over her belly. Then she waited. 15 minutes later, the door opened. Damian walked in first, and Nora felt her breath catch despite everything she knew about him. He looked exactly the same as he had the night she'd left. Expensive suit, perfect hair, that predatory grace that had once made her heart race and now just made her cold. Behind him came 4 men in tactical gear, weapons drawn but pointed at the floor. And behind them, moving with the casual confidence of someone who owned every room he entered, came Richard Castellano. He looked older than his photographs, with deep lines around his eyes and mouth. But there was something in the way he moved, the way he looked at her, that made Nora's skin crawl. This was a man who'd killed her mother, who'd orchestrated her entire life, who'd used his own nephew to trap her. "Hello, Nora," Richard said pleasantly. "I'm glad we finally have a chance to meet properly." She said nothing, just watched him with the same cold assessment he was giving her. Damian moved closer, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Do you have any idea what you've put me through?" 4 days, Nora. 4 days of searching, of calling in favors, of tearing apart every lead. And this whole time you've been hiding in my uncle's cabin." "Not hiding," Nora said quietly. "Waiting." "Waiting for what? For us to find you? Congratulations, we did." Now this ends. You're coming back to New York. We're going to have a very serious conversation about your behavior, and then we're going to put this unfortunate episode behind us. No. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Damian's expression darkened. What did you say to me? I said no. I'm not going back to New York. I'm not having a conversation about my behavior, and I'm definitely not putting this behind us. Nora stood up slowly, one hand supporting her belly. Because I know the truth now. All of it. Richard held up a hand, stopping Damian before he could respond. What truth would that be, my dear? That Damian isn't who he claims to be, that his real name is Dominic Castellano, your nephew, raised in the organization and trained to take over when you were ready. That you orchestrated our marriage, our entire relationship, as part of some long-term plan. For the first time, she saw genuine surprise on Richard's face. Your mother told you. She left me a letter. Actually, she left me several letters, and a journal, and video evidence, and financial records going back 30 years. She documented everything, Richard. Every crime, every connection, every dirty secret you tried to bury. Where are they? Damian demanded. Where are the files? Safe. Far away from here. And if anything happens to me, they go public immediately. Every news outlet, every law enforcement agency, every politician whose name appears in those records, they'll all receive copies. Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're bluffing. Am I? You want to test that theory? Because I've got nothing to lose. You've already taken everything, my mother, my freedom, 3 years of my life. The only thing I have left is this baby, and I will burn your entire empire to protect it. The baby is my grandchild, Richard said. My blood. You think I'd let you raise it alone? You think I'd allow my legacy to be squandered? Your legacy is going to be a prison sentence, Nora shot back, unless you're planning to kill me right here, right now. And if you do that, the evidence still goes public, so either way you lose. Damian moved closer, and Nora could see the rage building behind his carefully controlled expression. You stupid, stupid woman. Do you really think you can threaten us? Do you really think your little insurance policy means anything? It means everything. Because for the first time since I met you, I have power. Real power. Not the illusion of it, not the scraps you allowed me to have. Actual leverage. And I'm going to use it. To do what? Richard asked. He sounded genuinely curious, as if Nora was an interesting puzzle he was trying to solve. To make a deal. That got their attention. Both men went very still, watching her with predatory focus. What kind of deal? Damian asked carefully. The evidence in exchange for 2 things. First, you leave me and my child alone. Forever. No custody battles, no attempts to take my baby, no harassment or threats or manipulation. You give me a clean divorce, a fair settlement, and you disappear from our lives completely. And second, Richard prompted, second, you confess. Everything. On record. I want to know why you killed my mother. I want to know what the real plan was. I want the truth about who you are and what you've done. And if we refuse, then the evidence goes public and you both spend the rest of your lives in federal prison. Maybe you get lucky and die before trial. More likely, you end up in protective custody being slowly destroyed by the very system you've spent decades corrupting. Damian laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. You think we're just going to confess because you ask nicely? You think we're afraid of your threats? I think you're calculating the odds, Nora said, trying to figure out if I'm bluffing, if the evidence is real, if there's a way to kill me and stop the release. And you're coming to the same conclusion I did. It's not worth the risk. Better to give me what I want and disappear than to gamble everything on silencing one pregnant woman. Richard studied her for a long moment. Then, to Nora's surprise, he started to laugh. It was genuine laughter, full of real amusement. She really is Catherine's daughter, he said to Damian. Look at her. Pregnant, alone, surrounded by armed men, and she still thinks she can negotiate. It's almost admirable. It's pathetic, Damian spat. She's delusional if she thinks, Be quiet, Dominic. Richard's voice cut through the cabin like a blade. Damian fell silent immediately, and Nora saw something flicker across his face. Fear. After all these years of watching Damian terrorize others, it was strange to see him afraid. Richard moved to the window and looked out at the mountains. Your mother was the most brilliant woman I ever met, he said quietly. She understood systems, how money moved, how power flowed, how to hide things in plain sight. I loved her, truly loved her, but she couldn't accept what I was. She kept trying to save me, to reform me, to make me into something I could never be. A decent human being? Nora suggested. Richard smiled. A weak one. Catherine wanted me to give up power, to walk away from everything I'd built. She didn't understand that power is the only thing that matters in this world. Not love, not family, not even blood. Just power. So you killed her? No. Richard turned to face her, and for the first time Nora saw something like genuine emotion in his eyes. I did not kill Catherine. I would never have hurt her, but I couldn't protect her either. She'd made too many enemies, knew too much, had documented too many crimes. When my associates learned what she'd done, they made their own decision. You let them kill her. I didn't stop them. There's a difference. Not to me, Nora said. You're responsible either way. Richard nodded slowly. Perhaps, but responsibility and guilt are different things. I don't feel guilty about Catherine's death. I feel regret. Regret that she forced my hand. Regret that she couldn't see the bigger picture. The bigger picture being what? Your empire? Your legacy? My family, Richard corrected. Everything I've built has been for family. The Castellano name means something. Power, respect, fear. I've spent 40 years building that reputation, and I'm not going to let it die with me. That's where I come in, Nora said. Your grandchild, the next generation. You need my baby to continue the bloodline. Yes. The simple admission hung in the air. And if I refuse? If I take my child and disappear? Then you'll spend the rest of your life running, Richard said, looking over your shoulder, wondering when we'll find you. Because we will find you, Nora. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually we'll find you. And when we do, you'll what? Kill me? Take my child? You can't do any of that if you're in prison. You assume your evidence is enough to convict us, Damian interjected. But you're forgetting something important. We have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, judges, politicians, people who owe us favors. Even if your files go public, even if the FBI comes after us, we'll find ways to make it disappear. We always do. Maybe, Nora said, but it'll cost you. It'll expose you, force you to cash in favors you've been saving for decades. Burn through resources and goodwill that you can never recover. And for what? Just to chase down one woman and her baby? Is your pride really worth that much? She saw it then, the calculation happening behind their eyes. The weighing of costs versus benefits. The realization that she was right. Killing her would be expensive and risky. The evidence would go public. They'd survive, probably, but they'd be damaged, exposed, vulnerable. Better to let her go. Better to cut their losses and rebuild. What exactly do you want? Richard asked. I told you. A divorce. A fair settlement. And the truth. I want to know why you really orchestrated this marriage. What was the end game? Richard and Damian exchanged a look. Some silent communication passed between them, and then Richard nodded. Your mother didn't just document our operations, Richard began. She also stole from us. Over the course of 10 years, she skimmed money from accounts, redirected transfers, built a fortune that should have been ours. We're talking about $200 million, Nora. Money that belongs to the Castellano family. Nora's eyes widened. 200 million? Give or take. Catherine hit it brilliantly, used her skills to create a web of shell companies and offshore accounts that even we couldn't trace. But she left you the key to finding it. That's what the locket contained, wasn't it? Coordinates to this cabin, where she'd hidden the final piece of the puzzle. The account information, Nora said slowly. That's what this was all about. You didn't want me. You wanted the money my mother stole. We wanted both, Damian said. The money and an heir. You were supposed to find the account, give us access to the funds, and provide us with a child to continue the bloodline. It was a perfect plan. Except I found out the truth. Except you found out the truth, Richard agreed. Which brings us to the current situation. You have information we want. We have resources you need, so let's negotiate like rational adults. You want the account information? Yes. And in exchange, you'll give me a divorce and leave me alone. That's the deal. Nora appeared to consider this. In truth, she was counting down the minutes until the FBI arrived. Sarah had said 2 hours. It had been 90 minutes since that call. 30 more minutes, and she'd have federal backup. She just had to keep them talking. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" she asked. "You don't," Richard said bluntly. "But you have to weigh the alternatives. Give us what we want, and you have a chance at freedom. Refuse, and we'll take it by force. We have methods of persuasion that even a strong woman like you couldn't withstand for long." "You'd torture a pregnant woman?" "I'd do whatever necessary to protect my family's interests," Richard said. "Sentiment is a luxury I can't afford." Damian moved closer, and Nora could smell his cologne, the same scent that used to make her feel safe and now just made her nauseous. "Give us the account information, Nora," he said quietly. "End this. You've made your point, proven you're not helpless, but this has gone far enough. Give us what we want, take your settlement, and disappear. It's the smart play." "The smart play would be to trust you," Nora said, "and I don't. The moment I give you that information, I'm useless to you. A liability. You'll kill me and take my baby and raise it in your world, exactly like my mother feared." "We could do that anyway," Damian pointed out. "We could torture the information out of you right now. The only reason we're being civil is because my uncle has some lingering sentiment about you being family." "Then let me propose a different deal," Nora said. She moved to the table and sat down, forcing herself to appear calm despite her racing heart. "I'll give you the account information, but not here, not now. We do this properly, with lawyers present, with documentation that ensures my safety and my child's future. And if we refuse, then we're at an impasse. And when the FBI arrives, the FBI isn't coming," Richard said gently. "We've been monitoring all communications from this area. The satellite phone behind the firewood, we jammed the signal 20 minutes ago. Whatever you told Agent Chen, she didn't hear the rest of this conversation. You're alone, Nora, completely alone." The world seemed to tilt. Nora looked at the firewood, at where she'd hidden the phone, and felt cold dread wash through her. If they'd jammed the signal, if Sarah hadn't heard the confession— "You should see your face," Damian said with cruel amusement. "Did you really think we wouldn't scan for electronic devices? We're professionals, Nora. This is what we do." Richard moved to stand in front of her, and she could see the predator behind the cultured facade. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said quietly. "Where is the account information?" Nora said nothing. Her mind was racing, trying to calculate if the FBI had heard enough before the signal cut out, if they were still coming, if there was any chance. Richard nodded to one of the tactical team members. The man moved forward and grabbed Nora's arm, yanking her to her feet. Pain shot through her shoulder and she gasped. "Don't hurt her," Richard said. "Not yet, but make sure she understands we're serious." The man twisted her arm behind her back, not hard enough to break anything, but enough to make tears spring to Nora's eyes. "Last chance," Richard said. And then, from outside came the sound of helicopter rotors. Everyone froze. The tactical team rushed to the windows. Through the glass, Nora could see 3 helicopters descending toward the clearing, marked with FBI insignia. And on the road below, a convoy of vehicles was racing up the mountain. "They jammed the signal," Nora said, her voice shaking with relief and triumph. "But they were already on their way. Sarah sent them the moment I called. Everything you've said for the past 30 minutes, they heard all of it before you cut the line." Richard's face went white. Damian grabbed Nora, pulling her against him with a gun suddenly pressed to her temple. "Tell them to back off. Tell them or I'll kill you right now." "You kill me and the baby dies too," Nora said. "Your uncle's grandchild, your family's legacy. You really want to explain that to Richard?" Through the windows, she could see FBI agents pouring out of the helicopters, taking up positions around the cabin. A voice came through a megaphone. "This is the FBI. You are surrounded. Release the hostage and come out with your hands up." Richard looked at Damian, at the agents outside, at Nora standing between them with that cold determination in her eyes. "You planned this," he said softly. "All of it. The confession, the phone call, the timing. You knew we'd come. You wanted us to come." "I learned from the best," Nora said. "You wanted to use me? I used you right back. Everything you said is on record now. Every confession, every admission, and all those cameras my mother installed." They've been broadcasting to FBI servers since you walked through that door. The sound of battering rams hitting the cabin door echoed through the small space. Richard smiled, a cold, terrible expression that made Nora's blood freeze. "This isn't over," he said. "You think you've won, but all you've done is start a war. And in war, Nora, innocent people die." The door burst open. Federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Damian released Nora and dropped his gun, hands raised. The tactical team surrendered immediately. They were professionals, and they knew when a situation was lost. But Richard just stood there, staring at Nora with those cold eyes, even as agents moved to cuff him. "Your mother thought she could destroy me too," he said. "Look how that ended." "My mother died protecting me," Nora said, "and I'm going to make sure her death meant something. I'm going to watch you go to prison, Richard. I'm going to watch your empire crumble, and I'm going to raise my child free from your poison." They dragged him away, still smiling that terrible smile. Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway, moving quickly to Nora's side. "Are you hurt?" "No, scared but not hurt. We got everything, the confession, the admissions about your mother's death, the money laundering, all of it. This is going to be the biggest RICO case in 20 years. Nora felt her legs give out. Sarah caught her, helped her to a chair. "Is it really over?" Nora whispered. "The criminal case is just beginning," Sarah said. "But you're safe now. They can't touch you. I promise." As the FBI processed the scene, as they cataloged evidence and read rights and began the machinery of justice, Nora sat in her mother's cabin and finally let herself cry. She cried for Catherine, who died trying to protect her. She cried for the life she'd lost, the 3 years stolen by men who saw her as property. She cried for the baby growing inside her, who would never know its father except as the defendant in a federal trial. And she cried with relief because, for the first time in years, she was free. Sarah stayed with her, one hand on her shoulder, until the tears finally stopped. Then she helped Nora to her feet. "Come on," Sarah said gently. "Let's get you out of here. We have a medical team waiting to check on you and the baby." As they walked out of the cabin, Nora looked back one last time at the place her mother had prepared. This final sanctuary where Catherine had hidden the truth and hoped her daughter would be strong enough to wield it. "Thank you, Mom," Nora whispered. Then she let Sarah lead her toward the helicopter, toward safety, toward a future she'd fought harder for than anything in her life. The war wasn't over yet. There would be trials and testimony, custody battles, and legal maneuvering. Richard and Damian had resources, connections, lawyers who would fight every charge. But Nora had something they didn't. She had the truth. And in the end, that was the only weapon that mattered. The medical team cleared Nora and the baby within an hour, pronouncing both of them healthy despite the stress and trauma. But as Sarah Chen drove her away from the mountain compound toward the FBI safe house in Missoula, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. She was right. 3 days after Richard and Damian's arrest, their lawyers filed motions that buried the federal prosecutor's office in paperwork. Habeas corpus petitions, claims of illegal search and seizure, demands for immediate bail hearings. The legal machine that Richard had spent decades building roared to life, and suddenly the case that had seemed so solid began to develop cracks. "They're claiming the cabin search was illegal," Sarah explained over coffee in the safe house kitchen, "saying we didn't have probable cause, that the recordings were obtained without proper warrants, that your testimony is unreliable because you were under emotional duress." "That's ridiculous," Nora said. "They were holding me hostage. They confessed to murder." "I know, but their lawyers are good, the best money can buy. They're going to fight this every step of the way." Sarah paused, her expression troubled. "There's something else. The judge assigned to the bail hearing is Marcus Whitmore." The name meant nothing to Nora. "Should I know him?" "He's been on the bench for 20 years. Reputation for being tough on crime, no-nonsense approach to the law. But there are rumors, nothing proven, just whispers, that he has connections to some of the old families. The kind of connections that don't show up in financial records." "You think he's bought?" "I think we need to be prepared for the possibility that Richard and Damian might make bail. And if they do, they'll come for me." Sarah nodded grimly. "We can keep you in protective custody, move you to a different location, put armed guards on you 24/7. But eventually, there'll be a trial. You'll have to testify. and when you do, you'll be exposed." Nora looked down at her belly, at the child growing inside her who'd already survived so much. She thought about her mother who'd spent years running and hiding and still ended up dead on a mountain road. "I'm not going to hide," she said. "Not anymore. If they want to fight, I'll give them one. But on my terms, in public, where everyone can see what they really are." "What are you thinking?" Nora pulled out her phone, a new one, provided by the FBI with security features that made it nearly impossible to track or hack. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. "I'm thinking it's time to use the one weapon they can't defend against," she said. "Public opinion." She pressed dial and waited. The line connected on the third ring. "Jessica Raines, investigative reporter, New York Times. Who's calling?" "Ms. Raines, my name is Nora Ellison. You might know me better as Nora Wolfe, wife of the organized crime figure who was just arrested in Montana. I have a story for you, an exclusive. Everything you've ever wanted to know about Richard Castellano's criminal empire, the death of my mother, and how I brought them both down." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Mrs. Wolfe, I'm going to need to verify your identity. Can you—" "I'll do better than that. I'll give you access to everything. Documents, recordings, my mother's journal. But I have one condition. The story runs before the bail hearing. I want the world to know who these men are before any judge decides whether to let them out of custody. That's in 2 days. Then you'd better work fast." Sarah was staring at her with something like awe. "You're going to try the case in the press." "I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth," Nora corrected, "so that when they try to manipulate the system, when they call in favors and pressure judges, the whole world will be watching." Jessica Raines arrived at the safe house 6 hours later with a team of fact-checkers and a legal advisor. Nora spent the next 36 hours telling her story, showing her evidence, walking her through every detail of Catherine's investigation and Richard's conspiracy. Jessica was relentless, pushing for details, demanding proof, verifying every claim. But when she finally had everything she needed, she looked at Nora with respect. "This is going to destroy them," Jessica said quietly. "You understand that? Once this story runs, there's no going back. You'll be testifying not just in court, but in the court of public opinion. Everyone will know your name, your face, your story." "Good," Nora said. "I want everyone to know. I want every woman who's ever been trapped by a powerful man to see that it's possible to fight back, to win." The story ran on the morning of the bail hearing, spanning the entire front page of the New York Times, and continuing for 6 full pages inside. The headline read, "The Wife Who Brought Down a Criminal Empire Inside the Castellano Organization." Jessica had included everything: Catherine's murder, Richard's fake death and years in hiding, Damian's real identity as Dominic Castellano, the systematic manipulation of Nora's life, the $200 million in stolen money, and the recordings of their confessions. She'd even obtained photos. Richard being led away in handcuffs, Damian's face twisted with rage, Nora standing in front of the Montana cabin with federal agents surrounding her. By noon, every major news outlet in the country was running the story. Cable news dedicated entire segments to it. Social media exploded with commentary. And outside the federal courthouse where the bail hearing was scheduled, protesters began gathering with signs reading "No bail for criminals" and "Justice for Catherine Ellison." Sarah picked Nora up at the safe house at 1 o'clock. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be." They drove to the courthouse through streets lined with news vans and reporters. When Nora stepped out of the car, camera flashes erupted like lightning. Reporters shouted questions from behind police barricades. "Mrs. Wolfe, how does it feel to bring down your own husband?" "Nora, are you afraid of retaliation? What message do you have for other victims of domestic abuse?" Sarah guided her through the chaos and into the courthouse, where security was so tight it took 20 minutes to clear the metal detectors. The courtroom itself was packed, every seat filled with reporters, victims' rights advocates, and people who'd been following the story since the Times broke it that morning. Nora took her seat in the gallery, directly behind the prosecutor's table, where Sarah would be arguing against bail. Across the aisle, she could see Richard and Damian's legal team, 8 lawyers in expensive suits, all of them carrying briefcases that probably cost more than most people's cars. And then Richard and Damian were brought in, dressed in orange jumpsuits and shackles. Richard's face was impassive, but Damian looked furious. When his eyes found Nora in the gallery, the hatred in them was so intense it made her flinch. But she didn't look away. She stared right back at him, letting him see that she wasn't afraid anymore, that he had no power over her. Judge Marcus Whitmore entered, and everyone stood. He was exactly what Nora had expected, silver-haired, dignified, with the kind of face that suggested decades of weighing evidence and rendering judgment. "Be seated," he said, his voice carrying through the courtroom. "We're here for bail hearings in United States versus Richard Castellano and Dominic Castellano, also known as Damian Wolfe. I've reviewed the charging documents and the government's motion to deny bail. Mr. Harrison, you're representing the defendants?" A lawyer stood, tall, patrician, with the kind of polish that came from Ivy League schools and white shoe law firms. "Yes, Your Honor, Robert Harrison for both defendants." "Very well, Mr. Harrison, your arguments for bail?" Harrison launched into a carefully crafted presentation. His clients were pillars of the community, he argued. They had deep ties to New York, no history of flight risk, and were presumed innocent until proven guilty. The charges against them were based on questionable evidence obtained under dubious circumstances. The recordings were taken without proper warrants. The testimony of a single witness, a woman who was clearly emotionally unstable and had her own motives for destroying her husband, should not be sufficient to deny bail. Nora felt her hands clench into fists as Harrison spoke. He was making her sound like a vindictive wife, someone who'd invented an elaborate story to hurt the man who'd allegedly wronged her. But then Sarah stood up, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Your Honor, with respect to Mr. Harrison's characterization, the evidence in this case is neither questionable nor dubious. It's overwhelming. We have recordings of both defendants confessing to serious crimes, including conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Catherine Ellison. We have financial records documenting decades of money laundering and racketeering. We have testimony from multiple witnesses who corroborate Mrs. Ellison's account." Sarah pulled out a thick folder and began walking the judge through the evidence. Catherine's journal, authenticated by handwriting experts. The video confessions that had been stored on the USB drive. Bank records showing the movement of millions of dollars through shell companies and offshore accounts. And most damning of all, the recordings from the Montana cabin where Richard and Damian had confessed to everything. "As for Mrs. Ellison's credibility," Sarah continued, "she is not a spurned wife seeking revenge. She is a victim of systematic abuse and coercive control who spent 14 months carefully documenting criminal activity before she felt safe enough to leave. Her testimony is supported by physical evidence, electronic records, and multiple corroborating witnesses. She is also 5 months pregnant and has been living under the threat of violence for years." The suggestion that she somehow fabricated this entire conspiracy is not just insulting, it's absurd. Judge Whitmore listened to both sides, occasionally asking questions, his expression unreadable. When both lawyers had finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "I've read the charging documents," he said. "I've reviewed the evidence summaries. And I read this morning's New York Times article, which I must say was quite illuminating." Harrison stood up quickly. "Your Honor, that article is precisely why my clients cannot get a fair trial. The prosecution has engaged in a deliberate campaign of media manipulation designed to prejudice potential jurors and Sit down, Mr. Harrison," Judge Whitmore said quietly. The lawyer sat. "The New York Times article was based on evidence that is part of the court record," the judge continued, "evidence that will be available to the defense during discovery. If anything, that article has made my job easier because it laid out the government's case in considerable detail." He looked at Richard and Damian, his expression hard. "I've been on the bench for 20 years. I've seen a lot of criminals come through this courtroom, and I've heard every argument for bail imaginable. But I have to say, gentlemen, your case is unique. The evidence against you suggests a criminal enterprise that spans decades and multiple jurisdictions. The charges include murder, money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy. And most concerning to me is the evidence that you specifically targeted Mrs. Ellison, orchestrated her marriage, and attempted to use her as a pawn in your criminal activities." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Even if I were inclined to grant bail, and I'm not, I cannot ignore the fact that the government's primary witness is a pregnant woman who has already been threatened and held hostage by both of you. The risk of witness intimidation is simply too high." Harrison stood up again. "Your Honor, my clients are willing to accept any conditions, electronic monitoring, house arrest, surrender of passports. Mr. Harrison, your clients ran a criminal empire. They have resources you and I can only imagine. They have connections to corrupt officials and access to offshore accounts. If I release them on bail, I have no confidence whatsoever that they'll remain in this jurisdiction or that Mrs. Ellison will be safe. Bail is denied. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits to file their stories. Victims' rights advocates cheered, and Nora felt tears streaming down her face as the reality sank in. They weren't getting out. They would stay in custody until trial. Damian turned in his seat and locked eyes with her one last time. "This isn't over," he mouthed, but Nora just shook her head. Because it was over. This part, at least. Sarah found her in the hallway outside the courtroom, where she'd gone to escape the chaos. "You okay?" "I'm better than okay," Nora said. "I'm free." Over the next 6 months, as Nora's pregnancy progressed toward its conclusion, the case against Richard and Damian built momentum. More witnesses came forward, people who'd been too afraid to speak while the Castellanos were free, but who now saw an opportunity for justice. Bank records were subpoenaed and analyzed. The web of corruption that Richard had built over 4 decades began to unravel, thread by thread. Nora cooperated with the prosecution, spending hours in depositions and strategy sessions. She also worked with a team of lawyers to file for divorce and to ensure that Damian would have no parental rights to their child. The evidence of his manipulation and abuse made the case straightforward, and by her 7th month of pregnancy, the divorce was finalized. She also tracked down the account Catherine had hidden, the $200 million that Richard had been so desperate to find. It took weeks of working through the codes and clues her mother had left, but eventually Nora located it in a Swiss bank under a series of shell companies that Catherine had created. The money technically belonged to the victims of Richard's crimes, people who'd been extorted, businesses that had been shaken down, families who'd lost loved ones. Working with the FBI and the court-appointed receiver, Nora helped create a victim compensation fund that would distribute the money to those who deserved it. But there was one thing she kept for herself: $10 million that Catherine had specifically designated for her daughter. Money Catherine had earned legitimately before she ever met Richard and had protected through careful estate planning. It was enough. Enough to start over, to raise her child in safety, to build a life far away from the darkness that had consumed so many years. In her 8th month, Nora sat in a coffee shop in Seattle, far from New York, far from Montana, far from everywhere she'd been hunted, and met with Eleanor Morrison, the lawyer her mother had trusted. Eleanor was older than Nora had expected, with white hair and kind eyes. She looked genuinely distressed as she sat down across from Nora. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor said immediately. "I never meant for them to find you. I don't know how they got access to my communications, how they knew you'd called." "They had resources," Nora said. "They probably had your phones tapped for years, just in case my mother ever tried to use you as a contact. It's not your fault. Your mother was my friend. I failed her by not protecting you better. You didn't fail anyone. My mother knew the risks when she set up her contingency plans. And in the end, everything worked out." Eleanor pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "Your mother left this with me. Instructions to give it to you only after the legal proceedings were complete. She said you'd understand what it meant." Nora opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a single letter, written in Catherine's elegant script. "My dearest Nora, if you're reading this, then you've survived. You've defeated Richard, you've escaped Damian, and you've claimed your freedom. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. So proud of the woman you've become. I wish I could be there to see you raise your child, to watch you build a life filled with joy instead of fear. But since I can't, I want you to know a few things. First, you are stronger than you realize. The fact that you made it through this nightmare proves that. Second, you are loved. I loved you from the moment I knew you existed, and that love never wavered, even when I had to make terrible choices to protect you. And third, you are free, not just from Richard and Damian, but from the weight of secrets and lies that I carried for so long. You know the truth now, all of it. And the truth, however painful, is what will allow you to heal. Live your life, Nora. Live it fully and fearlessly. Raise your child with the love and freedom I couldn't give you. And know that every day, in whatever comes after this life, I'm watching over you both. All my love, always and forever, Mom." Nora read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she carefully folded it and put it away. "Thank you," she said to Eleanor, "for keeping it safe, for everything." "What will you do now?" Eleanor asked. "I'm going to disappear," Nora said. "Not because I'm hiding, but because I deserve privacy. I'm going to have my baby, raise my child somewhere quiet and safe, and build a life that has nothing to do with criminals or empires or revenge." "That sounds like a good plan. There's just one thing I need to do first." The trial began in early spring, just 6 weeks after Nora gave birth to a healthy baby girl she named Catherine Rose. Despite her lawyer's advice to testify via video link, Nora insisted on appearing in person. She wanted to look Richard and Damian in the eye one last time. The courthouse was even more packed than it had been for the bail hearing. The case had become a sensation, a story about power and corruption, about a mother's sacrifice and a daughter's courage, about justice finally catching up with men who'd thought themselves untouchable. Nora took the stand on a Tuesday morning in April, wearing a simple blue dress and carrying a confidence she'd earned through months of surviving. The prosecutor, a seasoned trial attorney named Michael Brooks, walked her through her testimony with practiced efficiency. She told the court everything. About meeting Damian, about the manipulation and control, about discovering the truth of his identity, about her mother's death and the investigation Catherine had conducted, about the Montana cabin and the confession she'd recorded, and then Michael asked the question that mattered most. "Mrs. Ellison, in your own words, why did you decide to come forward? You could have taken the money, disappeared, built a new life without putting yourself at risk. Why testify?" Nora looked at the jury, 12 ordinary people who would decide Richard and Damian's fate. Then she looked at the defendants themselves. "Because silence is how men like Richard Castellano maintain power," she said. "They count on victims being too afraid to speak, too broken to fight back. They build empires on the assumption that no one will ever be brave enough or angry enough to challenge them. My mother spent years documenting their crimes, building a case against them, and she died before she could see justice done. I testified because she deserved to have her story told, because every victim of their crimes deserved to be heard, and because I have a daughter now, and I want her to grow up in a world where powerful men can't just do whatever they want without consequences." The courtroom was silent. "Thank you, Mrs. Ellison," Michael said quietly. No further questions. Harrison's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to paint Nora as a vengeful ex-wife, suggested she'd manipulated evidence, questioned her mental state and her motives. But Nora had prepared for this. She answered every question calmly, met every accusation with documented proof, and refused to be shaken. When it was over, when Harrison finally gave up and dismissed her, Nora walked past the defendant's table with her head held high. Damian stared at her with undisguised hatred. But Richard looked almost sad, as if he'd finally understood what he'd lost by choosing power over love. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: financial records, recordings, witness testimony, Catherine's journal, everything. The defense fought hard, but there was simply too much proof, too many witnesses, too clear a pattern of criminal behavior. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, Nora was in the gallery with Sarah Chen beside her, her baby daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. "On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Catherine Ellison," the foreperson said, "we find the defendants guilty." The courtroom erupted again, but Nora barely heard it. She was focused on Richard and Damian's faces as they realized what they'd lost. The guilty verdicts continued: money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Count after count, guilty on all charges. When it was over, when the judge had thanked the jury and dismissed them, Nora carried her sleeping daughter out of the courthouse and into the spring sunshine. Reporters swarmed, but Sarah and a team of federal marshals kept them at bay. "Mrs. Ellison, how do you feel about the verdict? What's next for you? Will you write a book about your experience?" Nora stopped at the top of the courthouse steps and looked at the cameras. This would be her last public statement. After this, she was disappearing into the quiet life she'd planned. "I feel grateful," she said. "Grateful for the prosecutors who believed me, for the FBI agents who protected me, for the jury who saw through the lies and delivered justice. I feel sad for my mother who didn't live to see this day, And I feel hopeful for my daughter, who will grow up free from the fear and violence that define too much of my life. What message do you have for other victims of abuse? Nora looked down at the baby in her arms, then back at the cameras. That you're stronger than you know. That the men who hurt you aren't as powerful as they pretend to be. That the system isn't perfect, but it can work if you're brave enough to make it work. And that freedom, real freedom, is worth fighting for, no matter how impossible it seems. She turned and walked down the steps, leaving the cameras in the courthouse and the entire nightmare behind. 3 months later, Richard Castellano was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Damian received 40 years. Their appeals were denied. Their assets were seized. And the criminal empire they'd built collapsed as associates turned on each other and tried to save themselves. Nora didn't attend the sentencing. She was already gone, living in a small town on the Oregon coast where no one knew her story and no one asked questions. She'd bought a house with an ocean view, enrolled in online classes to finish her degree, and spent her days raising Catherine Rose in peace. She never married again, never wanted to. The scars from Damian ran too deep, and besides, she'd discovered something important during her ordeal. She didn't need a man to complete her life. She had her daughter, her freedom, and the money her mother had protected. That was enough. On Catherine Rose's first birthday, Nora took her to the beach and watched her play in the sand. The baby giggled at the waves, completely oblivious to the darkness that had preceded her birth. And that was exactly how Nora wanted it. That evening, as the sun set over the Pacific, Nora sat on her porch and opened the leather journal her mother had left her. She'd read it dozens of times, but tonight she turned to the final page, the one she'd avoided because it hurt too much to revisit. Nora, if you're reading this final entry, then you've done it. You've survived. You've won. I wish I could tell you that victory feels better than it does, that justice heals all wounds, that you'll wake up one day and the pain will be gone. But the truth is, trauma leaves scars. The betrayal you've experienced, the fear you've lived with, those things change you. They become part of who you are. But here's what I've learned. Scars are just proof that you survived something that tried to destroy you. They're evidence of your strength, not your weakness. So wear them proudly, my darling girl. And remember that every day you wake up free, every moment you spend with your child, every breath you take without fear, that's victory. That's what we fought for. I love you, Nora. I always will. Make the most of this life I helped buy you. Live it fully. Live it fearlessly. And when your daughter is old enough to understand, tell her about her grandmother. Tell her that Catherine Ellison was a woman who made mistakes, but who loved her daughter enough to die protecting her. That's my legacy. That and you. Always, Mom. Nora closed the journal and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, in federal prisons scattered across the country, Richard and Damian were beginning their sentences. They would spend the rest of their lives in cages, and there was poetry in that. The men who'd tried to cage her were now trapped themselves. But Nora didn't spend much time thinking about them anymore. They'd taken enough of her life. She wasn't going to give them another moment. Inside the house, Catherine Rose began to cry, probably hungry or wet or just wanting attention. Nora stood up and went to her daughter, lifting her from the crib and holding her close. "It's okay, baby girl," she whispered. "Mama's here, and I'm never going to let anyone hurt you. I promise." As she rocked her daughter back to sleep, Nora thought about the future stretching ahead of them. A future without fear, without manipulation, without powerful men trying to control their lives. It wasn't the future she'd imagined when she married Damian, but it was better because it was hers, completely and absolutely hers. The empire that had tried to destroy her was gone. The monsters who'd hunted her were locked away, and the woman who'd been invisible, powerless, trapped. That woman had become someone else entirely, someone strong, someone free, someone who'd survived a war against monsters and lived to raise her daughter in the peace she'd fought so hard to win. Nora Ellison had been many things in her life: a victim, a wife, a pawn in someone else's game. But now, finally, she was exactly what she'd always wanted to be: herself. And that was the greatest victory of all. As the waves crashed against the shore and the stars wheeled overhead and her daughter slept peacefully in her arms, Nora smiled. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. Not because the pain had disappeared, it hadn't. But because for the first time in years, she could look at tomorrow without fear. And that was enough. That was everything. The story of Damian Wolfe and Nora Ellison was over. The trials were complete, the verdicts delivered, the justice served. In years to come, it would be studied in law schools and written about in books. It would be held up as an example of how even the most powerful criminals could fall when one brave person decided to fight back. But for Nora, it wasn't a story anymore. It was just her past. A dark chapter that was finally, truly closed. The future belonged to her and Catherine Rose. To quiet mornings and ocean sunsets. To laughter instead of fear. To love instead of control. To freedom. And as Nora stood in her daughter's nursery, swaying gently while the baby drifted back to sleep, she made a silent promise to the woman who'd sacrificed everything to make this moment possible. I'll live the life you wanted for me, Mom. I'll raise Catherine Rose with all the love you gave me. I'll teach her to be strong and fearless and free. And every day, every single day, I'll make sure she knows that her grandmother was a hero, that you saved us both. Thank you for everything. I love you. Always. The baby sighed contentedly, and Nora placed her back in the crib. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the ocean, vast and endless and beautiful. Somewhere in the distance, the world continued its chaos. But here, in this small house on the Oregon coast, there was peace. And that peace was worth more than any empire. It was worth everything.